Here's something you might find almost hard to believe from wolfstreet.com. I mean, yeah, this is going to be a shocker for everybody, anyone who follows me or Big Swear. Federal Reserve pays $35 billion to banks, $6 billion to the reverse repo counterparties in interest alone for 2019, remits $55 billion to the U.S. Treasury. Then there are the dividends it pays its member banks. By Wolf Richter of wolfstreet.com. In addition to a lot of smaller activities, the Federal Reserve does two financially huge things. In 2019, it held about $4 trillion in interest-bearing assets, mostly Treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities. And it owed banks about $1.5 trillion in interest-bearing reserves. Among its other activities are its reverse repo activities and the costs of its own operations. On Friday, the Fed reported its preliminary result for 2019, including how much it paid the banks, $35 billion, how much it paid the counterparties of its reverse repos, $6 billion, how much it remitted back to the U.S. Treasury Department, $54.9 billion, and how much it paid in dividends. The revenues. The Fed earned $102 billion in interest income from the Treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities that it held in 2019. Now, I'm just going to ask a question. If the Fed earned $102 billion in interest, are we talking taxpayer interest? Like, you know how we owe $400 billion now every year to pay for our national debt? Are they saying the Americans that it itself got was $102.8 billion from us? Because if you think about where else would it come from? Some foreigner holding treasuries? Well, the foreigner doesn't pay interest. The foreigner gets the interest. The foreigner buys our treasuries and earns interest too. So how does the Fed earn $102.8 billion in interest income from treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities that it held in 2019? If you're earning interest on that, it almost sounds to me like you're the effing mortgager. Oh, well, they're holding the mortgage-backed securities. Oh, so when I pay my mortgage payment, it's going to the Fed? Who's it going to? Remember when I fought Bank of America years ago, 10 years ago, on my first house, and they were sending me letters. We are the servicer of your loan to note holder, blah, 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 blah. You're behind, and I call them. I'm just trying to clarify something. Since I owe this money, according to you, which, right, I have a mortgage, yep. Who is the note holder? Because it says note holder. Shouldn't it say the note holder XYZ company or bank or whatever? Yeah, but we don't reveal that. You'd have to file a lawsuit in order to find that out. I have to file a lawsuit against you to find out who I'm actually paying for my mortgage? Yes. That sounds completely normal, I said, are you taking notes right now? Yes, I am, sir. Like, why, you're contacting me to find out why I'm not paying and all that? Yes. Okay, you're going to write down what I'm about to say? Yes, okay. You're going to have to sue me if you want to see another dime from me. I've done an audit on the financials of this house, the mortgage, everything, and there are some major problems that I've discovered. If you want me to pay another dime, you're going to have to sue me. Did you get that? Yes, I did. Thank you. Have a nice day. They never called me again. I did get letters, of course, but they never called again. Where was I? The expenses. What it paid the banks. The Fed paid its member banks, and there are over 3,000 of them, interest due on required and excess reserves that banks have on deposit at the Fed. Those reserves on deposit at the Fed, liabilities on the Fed's balance sheet, averaged about $1.5 trillion in 2019, but had been declining through September. Also, starting at the end of July, the Fed cut rates 3 times. Remember, QAnon said, we know the Fed's going to try to raise rates. We are going to take care of that. And there you saw it. They lowered rates 3 times. including the rate it pays on reserves. So the interest the Fed paid the banks on these reserves fell 9.1% from a year earlier to $35 billion. Note that if banks had not deposited those funds at the Fed, they would have likely bought Treasury securities for at least part of it and would have earned about the same or a higher rate of interest from the U.S. government. When banks sit on large amounts of reserves, they're going to try to make money off them, one way or the other. What the Fed pays its reverse repo counterparties. The Fed paid $6 billion in interest to its counterparties on securities it sold under reverse purchase agreements, which is the opposite of repos. Reverse repo balances are liabilities on the Fed's balance sheet. The Fed has been doing reverse repos for a long time. Balances started surging in 2014, peaking at over $500 billion. Then in 2017, balances started declining. In 2019, they averaged about $270 billion. The Fed's own operating expenses amounted to $4.5 billion. Other expenses. The Fed also incurred expenses of $837 million related to producing, issuing, and retiring currency. $814 million for Board of Governors expenditures. I'm sorry, what was that? $814 million for Board of Governors expenditures? We have 12 Federal Reserve banks with a head at each bank in what they call the Board of Governors. $814 million. Expenditures, really. And $519 million to fund the operations of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Seems to me we should have done a bailout if you guys were protecting us. Therefore, why are you getting any money? $500 million for 2019, I guess, right? Net income and where it went. After it was all said and done, income minus expenses, the Fed had an estimated net income of $55.5 billion in 2019. Final data will be published in its audited annual report. Every year, the Fed remits nearly all of its net income to the U.S. Treasury Department. For 2019, it remits $54.9 billion. This is down from a remittance of $65.3 billion for 2018. The circularity. The U.S. Treasury borrows money to fund the U.S. deficit. This borrowing takes the form of selling Treasury securities. The Fed buys and holds a chunk of this debt, and like others, gets paid interest on this debt. Again, there's the answer. How does it get paid interest on the debt? You and I, taxpayers, income tax and other sources. After it funds its operation and then pays interest to the banks and counterparties, the Fed then pays the U.S. government back what's left over. Dividends to its member banks. The 12 regional Federal Reserve banks are private companies whose shares are owned by the financial institutions in their districts. The Fed pays dividends to the shareholders of the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. These dividend payments are determined by federal statute. For 2019, the Fed paid $714 million in dividends to these financial institutions. Though $714 million in dividend payments sounds like a lot, but compared to the $35 billion the Fed paid the banks in interest, it's practically a rounding error. Anything denominated in millions is a rounding error at the Fed, where the big things are denominated in trillions. Yes, that's the times we now live in. Could you imagine being the guy, the company, that gets to print the money? Recession doesn't affect you. Job loss, there's no job loss. You can't get rid of us. We're the ones that print the money. You can't, without us, you don't survive. The whole country goes down. No recession, no nothing. We promote our buddies. They get sworn in to nonsense. They don't even swear in. We give the banks, who own the Federal Reserve, of course, all the interest payments for just parking money that we let them borrow. So we let the banks borrow money from us. They, in turn, give it back to us, park it, so to speak, at our Federal Reserve institution. We pay them more interest back on the money. They then make the interest payments back to us on the stuff that they owed us for borrowing from us. Or we just let them give us this crap called mortgage-backed securities and other assets that are actually worthless, but we pay them 100 cents on the dollar and pretend they're not worthless and that they're extremely valuable, and then we'll give them interest on that stuff. So they'll park the asset with us, and then we'll just give them, the reverse repo crap. We've got assets on file, right? And if you looked at those assets, how much do you want to bet? Like those mortgage-backed securities, we already saw how they did that. We bundled them. We bundle these mortgages together. AAA rated. It can't get any better. And we found out that few were AAA rated. A bunch were completely garbage. Should be like, if there was a such thing as an F- rating, it should be it. People haven't paid their mortgages in years, being bundled in there with the good ones. And still being called AAA and rated. And then we found out it wasn't. Someone, found a turd in the punch bowl, basically. Yet, again, this is the system we live in. And what was the old, who said that? Was it Ben Franklin? One of them, back in the Founding Fathers days, had said, if the American people ever allow a private company, a bank, to, central bank, to issue its currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks that grow and the corporations that grow up around these people will own everything. And the people will be left in the streets with nothing left if this thing can continue all the way, right? You're seeing mass homelessness in the state of California. You're seeing unbelievable prices for housing, unaffordability in California, and other Democrat-run places, certain parts of New York, New Jersey, etc. And once again, the banks get all the interest, they get all the payments. When they fail and they gamble on Wall Street and they lose the bet, well, they're too big to fail. We can't let them fail. We bail them out again. And here you are, going to your job every single day. Maybe some of y'all doing okay, but a lot of people, as we know, aren't. Just barely make ends meet. May not like to invest in more crypto. I don't have the extra money. May not like to, I need a new car, but I don't have the money. But somehow the banks, the CEO stepping down with a $150 million golden parachute for retirement. But weren't they bailed out? And if they didn't get bailed out, wouldn't they have done like any other company in the face of the earth? They would go bankrupt. He would not be walking away with a $150 million parachute, golden parachute. That's for sure, right? Yeah, but again, it's a systemically important bank for our system in America, so we can't let them fail. Okay, so we bailed them out. Where's our money back? Because you remember when they said that, oh, well, the bailout was paid back. They paid the bailout was paid back. If the bailout was paid back, we couldn't have gone from $6 trillion, George Bush, to $10 trillion, really it was 9, and then Obama, right in the interim of Obama taking over, jumped to 10. Then it goes to 12, 14, 16, $20 trillion in 8 years during the bailout. Right, yeah. Save it, all right? Save it. Take care.